About 4 years ago, our world changed. Starting around November of 2019, word had started spreading that people were dying all over. That there was a virus that had been going from nation to nation. They didn't have any way to stop it. And our world began to turn upside down. After we thought for a while that everything was calming and everything seemed to be fine, they said, well, we're going to open back up everything. You're no longer going to have to wear masks. You're no longer going to have to do this or do that. Those of you that were working from home were told that, okay, now you're going to go back into the office and you're going to work there. And some people were saying, no, I'm not going to do that. You don't hear much about it today except to understand that it's still here. It's still affecting lives. There are people that are still dying. They don't give you the numbers. You don't know how much there is. When you listen to the news, you begin to start reading that, for instance, over 70, I think it was right around 75% of all people making under $50,000 were living from paycheck to paycheck. And some weren't even making it to the next paycheck. Because why? Credit card debt in America has now exceeded trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And we begin to see that there are things that are going on and things that are happening. That's the bad news. We're giving you bad news, good news. That's the bad news. Can I give you the good news? The good news is that bad news doesn't win. The good news is that the bad news eventually will go away. And the good news is that good news always wins. In the story that we're going to give you this morning in the sermon, we want to tell you about some bad news. There was a war that was going on in heaven. Had been going on for quite some time. But if you go back about 82 years, on a date in history of December the 7th in 1941, the Japanese Navy had caught the American fleet in Pearl Harbor on a Sunday morning. They came in and they killed 2,400 Americans, and they had disabled almost all of our battleships. And we were trying to fight a war. But there was good news. The good news was we had 3 aircraft carriers that were not in Pearl Harbor that day. Actually, they were out doing maneuvers. So the carrier fleet was still intact 6 months later when they destroyed 4 Japanese carriers at the Battle of Midway. And eventually, we won the war. And the battle was over. But prior to that, about 1900 years prior, there was another battle that was going on. And this battle was taking the place between God and Satan. You see, Satan was trying to destroy Jesus. Because if I can destroy Jesus, then nobody can have eternal life. If I can destroy Jesus, I won the battle. And so it was on that day that Jesus was crucified and hung on a cross and died. And many thought, his followers, we've lost. We've lost. There's no sense in going on. They've killed him, now they're coming to kill us. They went and they hid. Early in the morning, they remembered. It's time to go anoint him. It was after the Sabbath was over, and they went to anoint Jesus for his burial. The women came. They had everything with them because they were going to give him a proper burial. They came to the tomb. His disciples had rolled the stone in front of the tomb so nobody could take the body. The Roman government decided, now let's really make sure nobody's going to steal his body, so we'll seal this tomb and we'll put 2 guards here. And when the women got there, lo and behold, the stone was rolled away. They went in. They saw the angel. Said, why are you seeking the living among the dead? This Jesus that you're looking for said that he was going to rise, did he not? And they found out the good news. The only thing left in his tomb was the cloth that was over his face, folded up at the head of the shroud that he was wrapped in. As custom was, if you were eating a meal and you sat down to eat a meal, if you were finished eating, and this is still customary today, if you go into a restaurant and you take your napkin and you crumble it up, if the waiter is watching you eat and they see that you have crumbled up your napkin, they know that it's okay to go ahead and take your plate because you're finished. But if you take the napkin and you fold it like this, it means I'm not finished. I'm coming back and I'll finish this. The napkin was laying there to tell them, I'm not finished yet, I'm coming back. The good news is Jesus is coming back. And the good news is that when he comes back, all of the bad news goes away. Because no longer will we have to deal with the one, because Jesus is going to conquer. But in the Bible, as we've been reading in the book of Chronicles, okay? I don't have the scriptures up there this morning, so just kind of write them down as we go along. But in the book of Chronicles, there was a prophet by the name of Ezra. Ezra was basically giving us a story of the history of Israel. And as he's giving us this history, in the book of Chronicles that everybody talks about it, in 7:14, where everybody uses, I believe it's in 1 Chronicles 7:14, where it says, if my people which are called by my name would turn from their wicked ways and seek if my people which are called by my name would humble themselves and seek my face and turn from their ways, he said, then I would hear from heaven and I would heal their land. A lot of people use that verse, failing to read the previous verses. The previous verses that was happening there was a pestilence. And it talks about a pestilence in the land there. And actually the word pestilence could be interpreted as a pandemic. And so when When they called COVID, what did they call it? A pandemic. Because it struck the whole world. And God is telling us that my people, which are called by my name, would humble themselves and seek my face and turn from their ways. God has said He'd heal our land. Our land today is not healing because God's people are not turning. They're not seeking His face. Surveys have been done that basically said, in this generation right now, less than 50% of the people in America claim that they are Christians. Less than 50%. The next generation, it goes down to 35%, they figure. That is my grandchildren. That is your grandchildren. The generation of my great-grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, that generation will be down to 15%. Our great-great-grandchildren, at that point in time, if God has not sent His Son back, that generation will be down to 4%. Will call themselves Christians. We see that everything today is being, what we used to think was right is now wrong. And everything that we thought was wrong is now right. The world is turning upside down. Values are changing left and right. We're being criticized as Christians, told to shut up and don't get involved. And I say to you, it's time the Christians stand up and get involved. Because the world, we are the only ones standing between God and the world. And that is why we come when we talk about back to church. It's back to church is for, it is, summer is over. Vacations are done. It's back to normal. Kids are in school. So now let's come back to church. Let's come back to where we belong. We're the people. Church is not a building. Church is people. We are the church. The building can fall. The building can tumble. The building can burn up. But the only way that you can destroy the church is you've got to kill all of the people. Because the people are the church. So Ezra was talking about this, and he's talking about the people. The nation had just come out of a national crisis. And they needed some hope. They needed some inspiration. They needed a reminder that God, that our great God works out, as in Romans 8:28 says, don't you know that all things work to the good for those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of Christians that turn around and say, well, my life is a mess. My life is a mess. It will continue to be a mess as long as you're down here. But can I tell you that everything's going to work out okay if you love the Lord and if you will follow His purpose for your life? Not somebody else's purpose, your purpose. That's when things work out. Because you know God's got you. He's got you. And He always will. So when we begin to see this good news, bad news, this is the story that's going to happen this morning. There's going to be this good news and bad news story. And in this good news and bad news story, during this time frame, there's 3 generations of the Israelites. And during this 3 generations of Israelites, there is nothing but mayhem in their nation. It's just gone wild. And there's killings and murderings everywhere. May I ask you this question? How often do you ever pick up a newspaper or go online and read it now? You don't pick up newspapers. You read it online. How many times have you gone through the newspaper and found a day that somebody wasn't killed? It is very few and far between that you see that nobody's been killed. Every day you're reading a story about a young child, 2 years of age, that was just playing in the room, and a stray bullet comes through the room and kills the 2-year-old little baby or little child. Or how often does it happen anymore that people are out there playing in a football game or a basketball game or a baseball game, and they start getting into an argument because their team is losing, and the next thing you know, they're talking about people getting shot, people getting killed. How many times have people been driving down the road and somebody gets mad because you accidentally cut them off, you didn't see them in your blind spot, and so you pull over in front of them, and the next thing you know, they turn around and brake in front of you and stop you, and the next thing you know, they're jumping out of the car and they're shooting at you. You're watching it on the news all of the time. Things are happening all over. This was the nation of Israel. It was happening every day. It was nothing but mayhem. Everything was chaotic. Isn't that America today? Isn't that the world today? It's nothing but mayhem left and right. Here's a little prayer that we need to all pray this morning, if you would, and pray with me. Lord Jesus, speak to me. Amen. Because this sermon isn't for one person. This sermon is for us all. You that are in the seats, me that's here. This is for all of us and affecting all of us. In 1 Chronicles it says, I declare to you that the Lord himself will build a house for you. When your time comes to be with your ancestors, I will raise up after your descendant, who is one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for me. I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father. You will be my son. I will not remove my faithful from him as I have removed it from the one who was before you. I will appoint him over my house and my kingdom forever, and his throne will be established forever. There's two promises that God has given us, and number one was, in the house or in the nation of Israel, there would always be a king who was going to be a descendant out of David, leading all the way up to Jesus. And we knew this was going to happen. And then also we find out that in 1 Chronicles 17, he was also telling us that not only was there always going to be a king over there that was coming out of the lineage of David, but also there was coming a Messiah who was also coming out of the lineage of David. Those two promises he had given to the nation of Israel. And may I say this to you, God is always faithful to his word. Always is. I have found more than anything that I can always depend upon him, no matter what. So in this time, in 1 Chronicles chapter 17, we begin to see this. So let me give you some history, okay? In 841 BC, Satan sees an opportunity to get rid of the lineage of David. If I can get rid of the lineage of David, then I can get rid of the Messiah. And I will be ruler, not God. And Satan is fighting this battle with God. He wants to show that he can win. And he's going to do some things here this morning. But we need to understand, number one, God promised that David will never lack an heir on his throne. He always said that. Number two, he also promised that an heir of David would also rule God's kingdom forever. Not just the nation of Israel, but an heir of David would rule God's kingdom forever. Please understand that God's kingdom is not on this earth. His kingdom is what, ladies and gentlemen, you and I are building. That is why our slogan here is, we are not here to build a church. That is not my job. My job is not to draw people to this church. My job is to draw people to the kingdom. And God said he would supply daily to the church what the church needs. And if you're here this morning and you don't have a church home, hey, we need you. We need you more than you know, because there are people outside these walls that are hurting, and hurting bad. And we're running into them every day. You don't have to go far. And they'll tell you these stories. Now, back in the days that this was written, there was generally this common thing. And so if you go back to where we were last week, about 150 years, you go back to the King Jehoshaphat, which we were there. And if you remember Solomon was the first descendant of David to ascend the throne after David. And what did Solomon do to build the kingdom? He started marrying the daughters of his enemy. Not only would that bring peace into the kingdom, it also began to expand the kingdom. So it was very common for them to marry someone that was of another kingdom in order to expand. So now what would happen is that certain things were going to go on. And may I say this to you, as we've been doing these stories out of Chronicles, and we read these stories, and we try to say these stories don't relate to me. May I say this to you, if you listen to me this morning, the sermon, if you will follow it, it will keep, if God gives us 30 to 50 more years on this earth, it will give you some peace for the next 30 to 50 years, that you will not make the same mistakes that David's children made. So hang with me. We're going back to school to learn from his word. So if you go into the Old Testament and you imagine just for a minute, here you are in the land of Israel. And basically the land of Israel is right around the Mediterranean Sea, and you're there, and it kind of sits on the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, and you'll see it just kind of curved in there. And many times the nation of Israel was basically called the northern kingdom, which was Israel, and the southern kingdom was called Judah. The northern kingdom at this time was ruled by a king by the name of Ahab. Remember that name? If you've read the Bible, Annie, you'll remember Ahab because he was very famous. It wasn't, Ahab was not made famous by, who was that guy? With Ahab the Arab. No, he was the guy that sang the song. Ray Stevens, that's who it was. Ahab was famous before Ray Stevens came out with the song, okay? For some of you young people, you have no idea who Ray Stevens is. For some of you older people, you'll understand who Ray Stevens is, okay? You have the southern kingdom is ruled by Jehoshaphat. So Ahab, in order to secure the northern kingdom, he decided, I'm going to marry a wife, and I'm going to marry my wife from the king to the north. And the kingdom that was to the north was a kingdom called Sidon, Sidon. The name of that king was Ethbel, Ethbaal. And the word eth means with. Who is Baal? Baal. He was a false god. The king of Sidon was with Baal, a false worshiper. Okay? And so Ethbaal's daughter was named Jezebel. Now, you heard that story? So here the king of the north marries the daughter of the king or of the nation of Israel, has now married the daughter of the king of Sidon, Ethbaal, and her name was Jezebel. And you know the story of what's going on. So when they did this, and together, they had a daughter. And their daughter, they named her Athaliah, okay? And Jehoshaphat and his wife, they had a son. They named him Jeroboam. And what did they do? Ahab and Jehoshaphat. Ahab, remember? Jezebel. And now Jehoshaphat is taking his son and marrying the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. They're taking the nation from the south, Judah, and marrying someone who worships Baal. And so what happened was, now the first in line of the kingdom of Judah was married to a Baal worshiper. This is why I say to you, follow this. Many people will come to me and say, Pastor, I would like to get married. And they'll say, will you do the ceremony? My first question is, are you both Christians? If they tell me no, I tell them they need to go find somebody else to do the ceremony. Because it tends to have issues because your values are not the same. And the blending of values is important, because when you have children, you need to teach those children values. And the question is, whose values are being taught? One wins out over the other. I'm not saying that all people who are not Christians are bad people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying what I would do if I was you is work through God, trying to lead them to the Lord, to find this common ground. And we'll show you why. In forming this alliance, which is found in Chronicles chapter 18, It said, now Jehoshaphat's riches and honors and abundance, and he made an alliance with Ahab through this marriage. Okay? And so what ended up happening was he's marrying someone that could be dangerous in all of this stuff. So in 2 Chronicles 21, Jehoshaphat rested with his ancestors, was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. His son Jehoram became king in his place. He had brothers, sons of Jehoshaphat, Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariah, Michael, and Stephana. Jewish words are hard to pronounce. And these names, they need to name these Jack and Jill and Dick and Jane. But they didn't, because they had names that mean. But when Jehoram had established himself over his father's kingdom, he strengthened his position. Here's what he did. By killing with the sword all of his brothers, as well as some of the princes of Israel. All of a sudden, he's now married to a descendant of Ahab and Jezebel, and what does he do? He takes out every one of his brothers. And even the princes, Prince, Princes, the males that were also in line, he ended up taking every one of them out, getting rid of them. He killed all of his brothers. He's eliminating all of the competition, getting rid of them. Now, later on, he died. In 2 Chronicles chapter 21, it says that he died to no one's regret and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. He was so bad that they would not even let him be buried where all of the other kings of Israel were to be buried. He was suffering the consequences of his evil doing. And so what ends up happening? There's a group called the Philistines. Do you remember them? We're coming into the story. The Philistines killed all but one of Jehoram's son. What did God promise? There would always be someone to come out of the lineage of David to be on the throne. There's going to be one out of the lineage of David that will rule the kingdom of God. Even though Satan thought he had won, that Jehoram he becomes the king and he's going to wipe out everybody, God preserved one child. One, to make sure that was going to go on. It said in the inhabitants in 2 Chronicles 22, then the inhabitants of Jerusalem made Ahaziah, his youngest son, king in his place, because the troops had come with the Arabs to the camp, and they older sons. So Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, became king of Judah. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 1 year. 1 year. And his mother's name was Athaliah. If you listen to music, classical music, and you listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, it goes through different moods. It goes through some quiet moments. And then it comes and it starts building and building and building and building until finally it comes into this real loud climax of this. And this is where the story in 2 Chronicles is doing. It's coming from this point of just filling in some little blanks and little pieces. And so what ends up happening you begin to see that the story is going to happen. So Athaliah, who was Ahaziah's mother, she was the daughter of Jezebel. If you remember, again, not a worshiper. And the Bible begins to start telling her story. And when it begins to tell the story, the best that I can relate to who she is, because she's killing everybody. I mean, everybody. She is doing her best to just annihilate everyone. She, if you could use an analogy of something that you may relate to, she is the COVID-19 of our generation. She has this sickness that will just kill everybody. If you got around her, she's annihilating you. Because she doesn't want there to be any heirs left. We're getting rid of it. And you say, well, what does it have to do with this? Come to the New Testament. Satan came one day, and Jesus asked him this question: where did you come from? And he said, I come from seeking, from to and fro, seeking to destroy, seeking to kill and destroy. Do you know what Satan is trying to do to you as Christians? He's trying to destroy you. He's trying to destroy your testimony. He's trying to destroy your desire to tell others about Jesus. You see, because if you're not happy, you're not going to tell anybody else about him. If you're all engulfed or encased in all of the issues of things going around about you, and you're so encased on everything that's happening around about you, to where you get into this point of depression and anger and stuff, you're not telling anybody about Jesus. He's seeking to kill you. He wants to destroy your testimony. But can I tell you something? He can't. Because you are a child of God. And as a child of God, God will always win over Satan. Good always wins over evil. And this is not no old Western of Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday or Billy the Kid or anything like that. It isn't anything like that, but it is absolute truth that God will always, always win. So they begin to start telling all of these things. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 20 and verse number 10 and all the way through 2 Chronicles chapter 23 through 15, and this is why I don't read the verses, because I would be reading all of the verses for the rest of this. I just want to highlight these so that you can go back and read from 2 Chronicles chapter 16 all the way through the end, where we're going today, through 23. And this is where we need to understand that in 2 Chronicles chapter 23, 15, what it is trying to tell us this is the forces of darkness seem to be in control. And I ask you this question, be honest. What does it seem like is in control of the right now? Satan? He seems to be in control everywhere. It's not unusual. Let me go back to just a few years before the pandemic. There were a couple of churches that came onto the scene. And these churches started getting followers from all around the world. They were coming from other countries. That's where their roots were. And they came and they also spread into America. Everybody started singing their music. Okay? And their songs were really good. They really were. They were true songs of worship. But you know what they were doing? They would come in every Sunday. They would write the songs during the week. And they would try the songs out on the congregation to see which song was going on the album to be published. If the song didn't move the congregation, that song went to the maybe later pile. And then all of a sudden, it began to hit the news that there was a huge issue and a huge problem with the leadership of this church that a lot of people were listening to and a lot of young people were following. And they basically got rid of the leadership and brought some more in. But now a lot of people won't sing their songs because they don't like the people that the songs were associated with, because they didn't like the person. If that is our values, then we would not be singing Amazing Grace today. Because the guy that wrote Amazing Grace was a slave trader. But he found the Lord. And he wrote about what it meant to see real people in slavery and how he related that to us being a slave to sin. And how much sin entraps us to where we are a slave to the master of sin. And so what ends up happening was 7 years after they thought they had destroyed everything, they found out that there was just one heir left. And in second, do me a favor, give me this one verse, 2 Chronicles chapter 18 and verse number 24. I'm sorry, that's not the right one. We're not going to see that one. It's in 2 Chronicles chapter 18 through 24. Okay, so you're going to have to read, because in the book of Chronicles, in chapters 18 through 24, there is a war that's being played out, a war in heaven that's being played out on this earth. And so you and I need to understand something. But I do need you to do me a favor and pull up Ephesians chapter 6, and we'll start with verse number 12. And while you're pulling that, here's where we go. Because right now, we think we don't understand that we are caught in a war between God and Satan. And it's being played out right here in you and my life. It's going to be, and when we die, if the world is still here, it's going to be played out in our kids' lives, in our grandkids' lives. That's why the Bible says to train up a child in the way that they should go, so that when they are old, they will not depart. Now, when I was growing up, can I tell you something? I did not have a choice on whether to go to church or not. My mom and dad did not tell me, it's Sunday, what would you like to do? Stay in bed and sleep, or get up and go to church? I could lay there and say, this is a trick question. Because if I ever told my mom and dad I'd rather lay here in bed and not go to church, I think I probably wouldn't have a bed that night. I would have to go looking for where they put my bed, because it was, you're going. You're going. And I have to say, I am thankful that my mom and dad were the meanest parents on the block. It was terrible what they did. Ephesians chapter 6, verse number 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not fighting each other. We may not agree on certain passages in the Bible. And that's okay. Because why? We're at different points in our growth. We see things a little different. Maybe he hasn't enlightened us yet. So we're not fighting against each other. We're not fighting against flesh and blood, but we're fighting against the rulers and against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of the darkness or principalities of evil, spiritual forces in the heavens. Okay? In the heavens. Satan is doing his best, ladies and gentlemen, to stop the message of God from heaven to get to you. And you say, well, how do you know? Because there's a passage in the Bible of someone who prayed earnestly every day to God for deliverance. And the deliverance wasn't coming. It wasn't coming at all. And so what was it happening? One day, an angel appeared. So the individual asked the angel, what took you so long? I've been praying for quite some time. I would have thought that as soon as I prayed to God, that the answer was right there. The angel says it was. That as soon as God heard your prayer, he sent the answer. But you don't understand something. Between where you're at and between where God's at, there is a battle going on. I had to fight my way through that in order to deliver you the answer. Hey, can you stay for a little while? No, I can't stay. You don't understand. I've got to go back. Because there's others of the angels that I'm with are also fighting this battle, and I've got to go help them so that they can get through, so that I can go back to God to find my next assignment. And may I say this to you? When you're praying to God, the answer's coming. It may take a little while, because they may be fighting. But I guarantee you this, the answer's on the way. Because that's who he is. I don't know what struggles you're fighting this morning. I don't know how long it's been since you haven't been in church. And maybe it was a struggle this morning to get up to come. Even I have those struggles sometimes. There are sometimes it's like, God, I'm so tired. I am so wore out. And God, there's only going to be a few people there, you know. There's only a few. But God says, you know what? That's not your choice. Because I've got those few people coming for a special moment and a special time. I prepared that message for this crowd because they need to hear something. And maybe this morning that's what you need to hear, is that there is a war going on. But it's okay. He's going to win. And in the end, we are triumphant. My question to you this morning is this. All of the struggles that you're fighting in your life, you do not have to fight them by yourself. There are people that God surrounds you with to help you with those struggles. And that's what we're here for. The Bible says to bear one another's burdens. And that's what we're here to do. Our job isn't only just to tell others about Jesus. Our job is also to help become that rope to lift each other up, to become that strong bond that Satan can't get through because we are hedged in and protected. So this